So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Welcome to Trending. Coming up, we'll be joined by Kendra Tierney discussing how you can be Catholic in your home all year, from celebrating the feast days to observing the fasts to adding some fun Catholic traditions, from dares surrounding locusts and honey to much more. So stay tuned. We'll be talking about her book, Catholic All Year, the compendium, and now the prayer companion that was recently published. These are incredible resources for you to practice the Catholic faith at home. Coming up, I'll be discussing how Khloe Kardashian's nose job tells us a whole lot about the pressure women face today of all ages surrounding body image and expectations. Have you ever followed some of these sensationalized in vitro fertilization stories of women in these very challenging and sad circumstances where they're unable to have a child? And the next thing you know, they have this highly publicized IVF journey, an attempt to conceive and have a child of their own through third-party reproductive technology. The challenge is that as you follow these stories, there are often sad occasions along the way of babies that die, multiple rounds of IVF. I want to talk about what our response should be to these IVF stories, whether on television, social media, Oprah, you name it, and really understand a little bit better the challenges IVF poses for women today. And also from the Catholic Church's perspective of why is it intrinsically against in vitro fertilization? Why is IVF an intrinsic evil? It's a little intense to discuss when people are just struggling to have children. First, I want to talk today about this idea of how familiarity can breed contempt in our lives, or we become so accustomed to something that we almost, rather than looking at it as a luxury or a gift, we turn it into being a right that we deserve, a right that I have a right to, that I'm even owed. And it may seem kind of silly, but one of the ways I was thinking about this was the other day. You may know I got rid of my television. We got rid of our TV almost a year ago now. It's been great. I don't know. I've said this so many times before. I don't know how I had time to watch TV before. I really don't. On occasion, and I'll say rare occasion, we'll whip out the computer or the iPad and watch a movie, but we really don't watch much of anything. And we were watching a movie for the first time a couple weeks ago. And we watched, it tells a story of Captain Phillips. It was the ship, the cargo ship captain who we saw, their ship gets taken over. Tom Hanks is in it, and the ship gets taken over by Somalian pirates that end up hijacking the ship. Fantastic movie. 10 out of 10 recommend. If you want like a couple hours of a pure, and when I say this, pure adrenaline rush, this is the movie for you. It was fantastic. Lucas, you have to see it. The film was phenomenal. It's funny because this is how good it was, and this is how you know it was good, because I think it came out in either 2012 or 2013. And I remember being in the movie theater and thinking, I have to watch this movie. Now, for the last probably 5 to 8 years, every time someone said, do you want to watch a movie, I've always said, you know that movie with the pirates, it's a true story. And so I've been saying for years I wanted to see this, and typical, if it's not on Netflix, if it's not free on Amazon Prime, do you really watch it? Do you really watch it? I know I usually don't. And so finally we're like, okay, now is the time, we got to watch this movie. And I was realizing, with not having had a TV, not only is the movie phenomenal, pure adrenaline rush, no crap in it, nothing inappropriate. I realized like halfway through we had to take a break. It was so intense, and really I felt like the story could end 50 minutes into the movie. And then I was thinking after about like, this was an absolute like luxury. It got my heart rate up for the entire show. I was all worked up after the movie. And what I was thinking about was how we've gotten to the point where 60 years ago to see a film, to see a picture was a luxury. It was something that people, in fact, would dress up to go and do. In fact, I was even thinking about, airplanes. People used to think that they could die when they flew on the airplane, so people would dress up because they wanted to be dressed in their best clothes when they died, when they'd enter onto the plane. And there's so many situations today where we don't realize what we have is a luxury. And I realized this when I was watching the story of Captain Phillips, an incredible film. We've kind of gotten to the point where social media is something that I'm entitled to my social media time for. And I have a right to spend as much time as I want on it. We also have this attitude of instant communication should be at our fingertips. In other words, people should perpetually be accessible to us. We should have any form of entertainment we want, from games on our phones and computers to social media, texting, phone calls, FaceTime. You name it, we have incredible access to entertainment and communication in extremely simple and accessible ways. But I kept thinking about how we've gotten to the point where these things have no longer become luxuries. It's no longer a treat. It's so funny that people would even say in 2021, treat yourself, when in reality we treat ourselves all day long. We don't realize it. And this also made me think of how this pertains to Mass and the Eucharist as well. You see, the sacrament is an absolute gift that we are given. It's an opportunity that Christ has presented to us to participate in the life of God and to receive sanctifying grace. But instead of recognizing the sacraments, especially the Eucharist, as a gift, we've gotten to the point where we think it's something that we have a right to, that we're owed, that we deserve. But that's the thing with the sacraments. We don't deserve any of them. It's an absolute gift. It's God and His infinite charity and His infinite love giving Himself to us, the life of God. And how easy it is for us to just go through the motions and the monotony and almost become bored in what we do, whether it's going to Mass, having instant communication available at our fingertips with FaceTime, text messaging, social media, or even the entertainment we consume. You see, I think the reason why we become so bored and depressed as a culture today is that we no longer look at things as a luxury. Instead, we think of them as a right. I have a right to spend a few hours a week or sometimes even a night vegging out watching television after the long day that I went through. I have a right to communicate as much as I please throughout the day with whoever I want. Sure, you can, but it's fascinating again that we've gone from luxury to right, to convenience and a tool, to something that truly, yes, Patrick, you're right, it's a first world problem. It's just become monotonous. We're all bored because of our current luxuries. And so I kept thinking of this phrase, familiarity breeds contempt. What does contempt mean? The sense of disregard or even a sense of scorn. You see, disregard is where we can kind of be negligible about something, neglect it because it doesn't matter, it doesn't have any value to us. But in the word contempt, even is this idea of scorn, that something isn't even worthy of our respect. In fact, it's worthy of disrespect. In a sense, this is what's happened with our time, how we use our time. But also, this is a sense of what's happened in terms of how we look at the liturgy and the Eucharist. We don't see the worthiness of the respect for ourselves or the worthiness of the respect for God and the great gift He's given us. And so as you ponder perhaps this evening, as you go through that examination of conscience, I want to encourage you, how have you maybe noticed that phrase, familiarity breeds contempt, has started to reign true in your life in certain areas? What are some things that perhaps you can detach from to free up time? We talked a lot yesterday about saying no and how there's a season of saying no, and sometimes that makes us happier and more able to fulfill our responsibilities. And I think that this idea of familiarity breeding contempt is another one of those areas where we can take stock of our lives, reevaluate, and make some changes. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Joining me now is Kendra Tierney. She's the author of a 2-book series, really, Catholic All Year Compendium and now the Prayer Companion. It's a liturgical living for your everyday life. I often discuss here on the show about how important it is that we're living liturgically. That is, that we're feasting and fasting according to the church calendar. It's a good way to help us even with our dieting, of course. I mean, every day does have some type of saint's feast day, so we have to be a little picky and choosy, or else we'll be feasting every single day. But this book is the way to celebrate and bring to life the Catholic faith in your life for all of the family to enjoy. Kendra Tierney, can you share with us a little bit about what inspired you to write the Catholic All Year series?
Well, thanks so much for having me. And it really is, what you've said there, that finding that balance in our lives between feasting and fasting. And I think that when my husband and I first had kids, we wanted to grow in our own personal holiness. We wanted to learn more about our faith. We were both raised Catholic, but without really any, liturgical living traditions or anything like that. And so we decided, all right, we're going to figure this out. We're going to do the hard stuff. We're going to make sure our kids can say a rosary, and we're going to, always get to mass, and we're going to, observe Lent as a family. And those things are all so good and so important. But as I was learning more about these traditions, I was also coming across the fact that we're not just supposed to fast. I wasn't familiar with any of these feast traditions, but beyond just Christmas and Easter. And so learning that there are, more fasting days than you probably know about, but that there were so many more feast days than I was familiar with. And that if I wanted to really give my kids that complete picture of what our Catholic faith is, what our heritage is as Catholics, it's these fun and crazy feast day traditions. And I mean, some of them are go back hundreds and thousands of years, these liturgical living traditions.
Kendra Tierney, there's so many fun things that we'll see photos of you and your family doing throughout the year. And I want to talk in just a minute about how people can celebrate the Nativity of St. John the Baptist coming up in just a couple of days here. But before we go there, how will the Catholic All Year book help people live their faith in simple ways throughout the week? How do you hope that people will use this?
Yeah, so the first book, the Catholic All Year Compendium, has sort of the history and the backstory and the fun traditions that are behind over 100 feast days during the year and the different liturgical seasons. But when I submitted that book to Ignatius Press, to my editor, it was over 600 pages long, and they were like, maybe we need to pare this back a little bit. So instead of including prayers and readings and things in that, we took that out, and I just
of course
gave
the first
suggestions.
thing to go is the prayer.
Well, no, but the actual texts of the prayers. Instead, it has suggestions for things that you can, prayers that you can find for yourself and readings. And then those ended up getting put together eventually to become this prayer companion. And I'm actually really glad the way it worked out, because that book, the compendium, now is a resource that you can look at for ideas and to sort of grow in your own understanding of how liturgical living in the home and the liturgical year can work. But then the prayer companion is really just a grab and go resource. You don't have to, it doesn't require activities or cooking or anything. It's novenas and prayers and Bible readings and litanies. And it can just, in our home, it just sits on the dining room table and we can grab it. There's prayers for every day. And then there's prayers for the same feast days that I discuss in the compendium. And there's the collect prayer for each of the feast days, which is just such a beautiful way, I think, to connect with the liturgy, to connect with the Mass all over the world. and just a lot of fun devotions and traditions that are associated with the liturgical year.
No, I think that the last couple of years, it's been so much fun to see work like yours at Catholic All Year in your books that you put together, Kendra, where the faith is coming alive throughout the year. Because so often, even just 5 to 10 years ago, you'd find out, oh, it's so-and-so's feast day. Oh, bugger, there was a great novena that was leading up to it. Or, there was a fun tradition that you heard someone else was doing. Well, this is kind of your crash course. Like you said, you can have it on the coffee table. You can have it on the shelf. Really, you can be your go-to of, okay, what saints' days do we want to celebrate this week as we come together for that daily meal? We talk so often about how important it is that you're having that daily meal of dinner together. It's so important. This brings some tradition and faith and joy and laughter to that meal. Kendra Tierney, the author of Catholic All Year, the compendium, Liturgical Living for Real Life, as well as the prayer companion, is joining us here on Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio. You can find her on Instagram. We'll be sure to tag her. We actually have on Instagram, if you want to find me, at Timmerie, Timmerie. We've tagged her at Catholic All Year. But I want to talk about how we can celebrate the Nativity of St. John the Baptist coming up here in just a couple of days.
Yeah, so this really is one of my favorite feast days all year. It's really one of the original liturgical living in the home traditions. There are records of people celebrating the nativity of St. John the Baptist with bonfires as early as the year 700. And so it probably predates that quite a bit. But people who have been writing about it since the year 700. And I just love that so much. I love the idea that I, with my family, can go out in my yard and do something that connects me with people, with Catholics all over the world, and throughout time in this tradition of coming together. And I'll do the same thing with my family that all of these people through so much of history have done with their family, which is sit down and come together as a community for fun and to talk about the gift that St. John the Baptist is to the church and to our families, and how, his life is an inspiration for us. And it's super fun. And so that should, the tradition is to do that on the eve of St. John the Baptist. So that's tomorrow night would traditionally be the day, but
for a fire, right?
For a bonfire. Yes. For a bonfire would happen on the eve. But there is a long-standing tradition in the church of moving feast days when necessary. So if it works better to do it on the weekend, we don't sweat that too much. And so I think we're going to do our family.
So why a fire though? Because it's been part of the tradition, as you mentioned, since the 700s. But what brought that about, and what's the connection to St. John the Baptist?
I think that, I don't know, to be honest, if there's a specific liturgical association with the fire itself, but there is a tradition of having a blessed bonfire, if you can have a priest or a deacon come over, he can bless your bonfire, which is pretty cool. Or you can there are prayers that you can say around it that are included in the prayer companion. But I think that it's a bonfire just because it's midsummer, which I think it's beautiful, the place that the Nativity of St. John the Baptist falls on the longest day.
Right. And it has to do with light.
Right. Yeah. And then the, as the days after the Feast of St. John the Baptist, the days begin to get shorter and shorter as he is decreasing. And then until we get to December, when we celebrate Jesus's birth, and the days get longer and longer.
So this is so much fun because it's right at the heart of really the summer solstice, where, as you're saying, the year transitions. We have the longest day of the year right around St. John the Baptist's feast day. And even in the prayer in your book, I mean, it's such an incredible resource. The prayer companion, Catholic All Year, the liturgical year in practice. In the prayer itself, it talks about how the light that never fails and the source of all light, that is Jesus, is coming, essentially, that this is a new fire. And John the Baptist prepares the way for the light of the world. And so this is why we see this celebration of fire as a part of John the Baptist, because he's preparing the way for the true light. And as you said, that transition where the days now in after summer solstice, right around St. John the Baptist feast day, start to slowly darken. We work our way to Christ, where right at about Christmas, so right around the winter solstice is when we start to have those longer days again, and it's with the coming of Christ. And so we see this play on light, and it's so fascinating because before we didn't have, all of the light fixtures that we did. We'd have fire, and that was the element people had in the evenings to bring light to the world. And so this tradition of John the Baptist, it would be a luxury to have such a large fire celebration such as this. Kendra, what other practices and challenges do you have in your home to celebrate the Nativity of St. John the Baptist?
Yeah, so the other thing that we really like doing, and I will preface this by saying I really love making feast days memorable, something that the kids are going to remember, that they're going to laugh about and talk about. So our fun family challenge for the Feast of St. John the Baptist is to eat locusts and wild honey. So you can and crickets are eaten as food in many places all over the world as kind of a normal food, including in Mexico. So if you have a Mexican grocery store near you, you can usually find like snack crickets. And the first place I came across them was actually a giant truck stop, and they had them in various flavors of crickets. And I stocked up and saved them for St. John the Baptist. But yeah, so we kind of dare each other to eat crickets. And if you eat a cricket, then you get a little honey stick to wash it down with.
I don't know if I'll be eating any crickets. I loved in the book you were actually talking about how, it is easy to find at candy stores. I remember as a kid, there were all of this candy store that we go to, Layman's Candy Factory in Southern California, and they'd have all these delightful candies, except for these candies that sat in the window. There were lollipops with various bugs dried in them. And I think one year I finally convinced myself, I want to get that. And I kind of riskily as a kid, gave a little lick to the outside of it and decided that was enough. I didn't want to get too close to the cricket on the inside. So that's the closest I came. But Kendra, I love you mentioned in the book that, you're not forced to try the cricket on St. John the Baptist feast day. But if you don't, you guys will chant each other's name and give into a little bit of peer pressure on that feast day. So here we are. That's a Kendra Tierney, the Catholic All Year. You can find her at CatholicAllYear.com. We'll post links in the podcast, and we've also tagged her on social media. She really shows us how she brings to life the faith and the liturgical living in her home. I'm sure maybe you'll get a sneak peek of some of the challenges of locusts and wild honey coming up here in a couple days. I'll be right back here on Trending to talk about Khloe Kardashian and her nose. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio Studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/Forester.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Okay, I really want to talk about Khloe Kardashian's nose, because the fact that everyone is talking about her and yet another one of her body parts is just an absolute travesty. I know that the Kardashians, from Keeping Up with the Kardashians, they just had this big family live reunion, and yes, Khloe Kardashian has confirmed that she did have a nose job, but what does that tell us about the pressure that young women are under today? And when I say young women, it's not just young women. It is your 12-year-old. It is your 25-year-old. It's your girl in her 30s like Khloe Kardashian, but it's also your women who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s. There is this unrealistic sense of pressure for women to be hot and available and to constantly perform in terms of their persona today. And I think that it's something that we need to talk a little bit more about, because my heart was falling out of my chest as I was reading some of the statements that Khloe Kardashian has recently put out with regard to body image and what she's experienced. Listen to this one. If this isn't a cry, and when I say a cry, an absolute cry for her saying, people, please stop. I don't know what else is. She said this, and this could be written, and I want you to really hear what I'm saying right now. This could be written by your daughter. This could be written by any 30-something-year-old, 14-something-year-old, or woman in their 20s. Because this is how intense the pressure is. And even the good girls, the sweet girls, the people who don't seem to be struggling with body image, I think so many young girls, especially teenagers and college students today, are under extreme pressure due to the social media and the digital sphere we live in, with incredible movies and television shows that pose an unrealistic expectation of what it means to be a woman and what that looks like. Listen to this. Khloe Kardashian said, "My soul is at a breaking point. In regards to the public thinking they're allowed to talk about my weight, my face, and my personal life." She goes on to say, "I don't want to hear this anymore. It's not healthy for my spirit." This statement is so heartfelt if people don't listen. And sure enough, news media isn't going to listen. I think that I read this on USA Today. They posted it, and all they did was post what Khloe Kardashian said, that she confirmed she had a nose job, that she was embarrassed about an image that went out some months ago that was an unfiltered image of her with no makeup on and no filters, and that some of her publicists and lawyers ended up going after that photo to remove it from the internet. That's after all of this. And here's what she says. I'm just going to read it one more time, because this could be any teenager, any college student today. Truly. And I really mean it when I say any one of them. "My soul is at a breaking point in regard to the public thinking they're allowed to talk about my weight, my face, my personal life." She continues, "I don't want to hear this anymore." And she finally says, "It's not healthy for my spirit." Here's a girl who's about to turn 37 this coming week. 37. Who's incredibly famous, has made a lot of money by showing off her body. In fact, I don't recommend looking up images of Khloe Kardashian because, in fact, many of them are borderline and outright pornographic. And here's someone who's struggling so intensely with body image, self-loathing, self-consciousness, the critiques of others, and everything for her has to come through a filtered lens. Not too long ago, there was a photo that went up of Khloe Kardashian in her swimsuit at a family gathering, and somehow the photo ended up being posted online. She wasn't happy about it. It wasn't a photo she wanted to be shared. She didn't have any makeup on. She didn't have any filter on. And if you know anything about Khloe Kardashian, she always has a good filter and some Photoshop on her photos. So she didn't like that this photo was unfiltered. No makeup. And so her publicists and attorneys actually went after and did what they could to have this photo removed as much as possible from the internet. This was a crisis for Khloe Kardashian at nearly 37 years old. She said at one point, "This is how I've been conditioned to feel." So this is how I've been conditioned to feel, that I'm not beautiful enough just being me. Again, that's a statement that any teenager or college student, or even many adult women like Khloe Kardashian, sure, maybe not with all the fame and the money behind flaunting their bodies, could say, "This is how I've been conditioned to feel, that I'm not beautiful enough just being me." She literally says, "My soul is at a breaking point. It's not healthy for my spirit." This is a girl who's acknowledging, I have a soul and it matters. And this is eating me alive. I need all of us to ponder for a moment how intense the pressure has become for young women to be hot and available all the time. The fact that Khloe Kardashian has to post a filter every single time she goes on social media is so sad. You see, we've got to talk about some solutions for young girls, and we have to talk about it day after day after day. And here's why. Because young women today are constantly being told they're not enough, they don't measure up, and what they do have needs to be altered by some form of Photoshop or whatever the latest app and the latest filter is. Personally, I really try not to use any of these filters, whether it's making creepy bug eye faces or kind of creating a different shape of my body when posting it on social media. Sure, might use a color filter on occasion because it makes a photo look nicer. Or I'll be honest, there are a lot of times where I post social media posts and I don't wear any makeup and I'm like, yeah, maybe if I change the coloring on this, it might look a little bit better. But that I think is something we have to be very, very aware of. That girls today think that they can't post anything unless they're completely done up. And when I'm talking about done up, I'm not just talking about, 50, 60 years ago putting on lipstick or maybe putting on some blush, mascara, and eyeliner. I'm talking about caking on thick layers of makeup. I can't tell you how many women I've seen, friends, family members, where they're caking on layer after layer, and I'm not trying to criticize you if this is you, of makeup, and I'm looking like, you have beautiful skin. Why is it and who is it that has told you that you have to put a pound of makeup on your face? Your pores are probably crying aloud. Your acne isn't getting any better. In fact, it's making it look worse. I'm sorry, I'm being honest here. On rare occasion, it can help. Who told you that you had to do that? Okay, I'm just letting you know, some of the guys behind the scenes right now are nodding their heads in agreement, okay? And I'm saying this, I'm slightly outing you guys right now, because here's the reality. Who are we trying to please? Are we trying to please ourselves? Are we trying to please others? You can see through your own fake filter you put online. Do you really think that other people can't see through that filter as well? You can't see through the caked on makeup. This is the challenge. And so here are the solutions. And I think that these are guidelines that we have to set up for ourselves as adults, and guidelines in, I think, really an accommodation to help young people today. Number one, get rid of the filters. There's something in me that it just sat so wrong when you can sit side by side with another person, like swap faces. It just creeps me out that we can do that digitally. In one respect, it's really cool. And in the other respect, I'm like, oh, that's creepy. I don't want to do that. It creeps me out when people want to make bug faces of the face, in like fish lips. I don't know why. It just always really frustrated me. It weirded me out. Maybe, I think right around the time some of this became popular was very close to the time of the Hunger Games coming out on movie. And I remember looking at the Hunger Games, and they had kind of these weird versions of the people. And how, like, the people with, like, the really weird makeup, almost these transhuman types of individuals, these cat-like looking individuals, these funky colored skin and glittered up and dolled up individuals. This is what we're moving to with this transgender movement. It's a fake version of ourselves. It's a plastic version of ourselves. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be plastic. I don't want to be fake. And I don't want to be forced into feeling like Khloe Kardashian, that I have to have a nose job and then I have to tell the world that I had a nose job too. Or even to the point where Khloe Kardashian said that not only did she have a nose job, but she's even done other face work. And while Botox didn't agree with her, yes, she has done other minor work. We've got to stop here. So number one, a big rule I keep in my life is no filters. No weird thing. Sure, an occasional change of color on the screen is one thing, but these filters that are manipulating the image to tell a lie, I think is something we have to understand. We're lying with what we're posting on social media. And not seriously saying, oh, you're lying. No, you're lying to yourself because it's not making you feel better. I think another part of this is limiting screen time. The Kardashian family is incredible at social media and they're incredible at public relations. They are constantly in our face telling their story. but they're constantly on their phones telling their story. And I think that this is part of the reason why people such as Khloe Kardashian, whose body has been sold for so much money as a social media influencer, that it's literally destroying her. She's crying out, saying that her soul and her spirit can't take this anymore, and that why isn't she just enough being herself? So decrease screen time. Monitor screen time for your kids. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman was with us just last week, and we're talking about how there's a sleep epidemic occurring in our nation. The last few times he's been on the show, he's told a story of a young girl about 13 years old who committed suicide. She was being bullied all night long. She had her phone in her room by kids who were picking on her. Her dad had no idea. She convinced her dad, who's law enforcement, that she should be able to have her phone at night, that it was embarrassing for him to take it away from her. Why was she being bullied? She was probably in part, like so many of the girls today, being bullied over unrealistic standards of beauty. So this brings me to another really important point, and this will tie into a topic we'll discuss tomorrow, which is about dads and uncles and how important both are. Men, you matter so much, and you can make a world of difference in women's lives. You help set a standard of self-esteem by the way you compliment and admire women for who they are, not just what they look like. You see, affirmation from men makes a world of difference. There's this trend of young girls coming out as transgender. Why? Because they're uncomfortable in the transition into womanhood, in puberty. They're uncomfortable with how their body looks, how their body's changing. They're uncomfortable with the way people are expecting them to be on social media, that they would rather be a boy. They would rather be transgender than be forced to go through what Khloe Kardashian is going through. This is at the heart of the crisis of the transgender ideology that is eating away at our young girls and boys. Dads, affirm your daughters. Uncles, grandfathers, men, affirm the women in your lives. Affirm the young girls. Tell them they're beautiful, and it's not just for the makeup they've caked on or the short shorts they're wearing or the bikini that's on. Help them to understand who they are as beautiful, but yes, their body is too. Their body is good. Their body's meant to be respected. Their body's meant to be protected. You set the standard of bodily protection, even in terms of how they perceive themselves on social media. You want to get rid of this crisis of girls like Khloe Kardashian, who has a lot of money and a lot of fame, saying that her soul is at a breaking point and that she can't do this anymore. It's not healthy for her spirit. Save the girls in your life. Affirm them. Help girls to have and women to have a healthy understanding of their approach to weight and not obsessively weigh themselves and obsessively diet if it's not necessary. Everyone's different, but a couple of simple standards. If your clothes aren't fitting right, that's when it's a good time to start to reevaluate. And I'm not saying if your clothes don't fit right when you insist on buying size 0 for a pair of pants or a size 3 for a dress. That's unrealistic for the majority of people. It's when you have clothes that fit right, when you look nice, and then when they start to not fit right, that's a good time to start paying attention for a diet. That's a good time to check in on a basis that is reasonable on the scale. Not every day, not every morning, not every night. Maybe once a week. Maybe once every few weeks, or maybe once a month. You see, the approach we have to beauty and health, weight, really does matter. We're setting an example for other people. And I hope and pray that someone can set an example for Khloe Kardashian, whose body has literally been sold by her family for fame and attention. Where will the women and young girls in your life hear that they are beautiful and see a healthy standard and role model for body image if they don't see it from you? They'll only see it online and in movies and television. Those images are photoshopped, cropped, and edited. You see, girls and women today need to see real life examples in person of femininity, of healthy body image, of a healthy approach to weight. We can't just leave them to a digital world that sets a false standard for beauty and expectations. So pray for Khloe Kardashian, because this girl who's just gone through with a nose job, if she could have a different perspective on her weight, if she could have a different perspective on her body, on her face, and if she could set the tone for other young women, it could go a long ways. If Khloe Kardashian's doubting, so many other young women are. So pray for Khloe Kardashian and pray for the daughters in your life and affirm them. We'll be right back here on Trending, talking about a Catholic approach to in vitro fertilization and much more.
Timmerie will be right back. You can reach her on Instagram and Twitter at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Over the last year, I've seen a number of stories. Some call them a little bit of science and a little bit of miracle stories. Stories of women who couldn't have children and through in vitro fertilization are going through round after round of IVF, attempting to conceive a baby. Now, in vitro fertilization, IVF, if you're not really familiar with it, is a third-party reproductive technology, which, by the way, the Catholic Church intrinsically speaks out against. And I'll touch on that in a moment, but you may have followed some of the stories. There's Jacqueline Misch, who is a Instagram wine educator and influencer, who went through 3 rounds of in vitro fertilization. Last year, the story was told about how finally, in the second round of IVF, one of her babies was carried to 20 weeks. They were so excited, sharing the stories, the photos, the ultrasounds, and at 20 weeks, a miscarriage occurred. And then earlier this year, after going through the tragedy, which it was really sad because I had been following her story and then I dropped off her story right around when I had my baby, and she lost her baby right around the same time. And so I remember just looking at just the sorrow and the grieving her and her husband had been going through. And the next thing you know, boom, they start trying to go through a third round of in vitro fertilization, and they post on social media this photo board, and it says 26 babies, 26, they say, retrieved, 24 fertilized, so 13 blastocysts. So 26 eggs to 24 fertilized new human beings to 13 blastocysts. So we're talking about eggs that are harvested. Now, 24 new distinct human beings at fertilization, the earliest stages of life, then 13 blastocysts. So through this process, she's talking about all of these children starting at 13. Now, as of April 13, new distinct human lives were present. And as of right now, I don't think that this third round of in vitro fertilization was successful because we've heard nothing. And it's important to talk about this because this is the truth of in vitro fertilization. Often, it takes multiple rounds of in vitro fertilization, and often, it's not successful. And women's stories aren't being told. Now, if it is successful, there's a lot of pain that can come along the way with it. I'm going to tell you another story for just a moment here. And before we go to that, Jacqueline Misch, she can't have children. She is one of the handful of people, I've seen a stat that says 1 in 5,000, who has MRKH syndrome, which is a syndrome where you're born without a uterus, and so has the inability to have a child. And this is, as some other women experience, is challenge when they find out they will never be able to have a child. Motherhood is at the heart of femininity, whether you have a child or not. And yet, even though our culture says that you don't have to have children or you can have children on your terms, motherhood is still written on the hearts of women. Our body is oriented toward this. It's a part of our nature as women. But let's talk about another story. The story of a surrogate who was the grandmother of the child she carried. Last year, I was traveling cross country to Baltimore, and I was watching Oprah's Instagram feed. In the story, I saw this photo. I don't think I ever talked about it here, actually. I saw this photo of this young girl and her husband, and they're holding hands and they're holding a little pregnancy announcement. But in the same photo is mirrored that same girl with her husband, and she's got her arm reaching backward, and mirrored is a splitting image almost of herself, but an older version. And I thought, oh, that's weird. I wonder why they created that. And I'm reading the sign, and it says, created with a little bit of love, science, and a miracle. Something like this. And the photo actually isn't herself. I end up reading the caption, and there's the couple with a pregnancy announcement, and then the mother, the biological donor mother, has her hand back because she's holding the hand of her own mother, which would be the grandmother of this child. She wanted a child. She couldn't have children after all. I think she had had a number of miscarriages. I believe she lost twins. It was a really tragic experience that she went through. Now, she was very young in her 20s, and she still had years. This is someone who I wish knew about naprotechnology. Naprotechnology and fertility care practitioners who are the top leading experts, although not as well known because they were founded out of a request by the Catholic Church to help with the fertility challenge of today, and they help women to conceive by treating underlying health causes. I wish this woman knew. She gave up too soon and turned to in vitro fertilization. Now, the super ovulation, as we've talked about, we spoke about egg harvesting last week on the show, and we can post a link to that in the show notes for today's show. She gave up too soon. There was a possibility she could still have children. She had a lot of challenges, though. So here's the deal. She decides she wants a kid. She's going through the process, and the big question is who's going to be our surrogate, because she wasn't going to carry the baby. This is part of the challenge for her of carrying a baby to term. Her own mother, who is a healthy 50-year-old runner athlete, says, oh, I'll carry your baby. The grandmother carries the grandbaby as the surrogate. She goes through the pregnancy. All of this is documented on social media. Oprah even covered it on her show and featured the story. Well, the mother gave birth, I think, somewhere around November of last year. Well, the mom is joyful and has the baby. The grandmother, who is the surrogate, ends up going through an extreme postpartum depression. You see, this is part of the story that not a lot of people are told. Surrogacy has a health and psychological impact on the women who are surrogates. You see, a lot of women struggle with postpartum depression or even just the challenges of becoming a mother for the first time or yet again. Hormones come and go. Sleeplessness is present. But there's that solace and comfort of having your baby. Well, for women who are surrogates, they don't get to keep these children. They don't have that child as a part of that process after birth, that postpartum, sometimes that postpartum depression transition. They don't have that bundle of joy that belongs to them. Well, the grandmother who is a surrogate ends up going through extreme postpartum depression and ends up struggling, doesn't end up being able to nurse as much. And the whole situation is so miscombobulated and out of touch with the creation of a mother and father having a baby. Now, the question is, the crisis at hand is, well, what about those people who can't have children of their own accord? Because a lot of people would say, this is great news. They couldn't have kids. Here they're having kids now. Yeah, children are a gift. And I want to be very clear for a moment here. Any child, no matter the means of conception, is a gift from God. We're not saying that babies are bad. No, we're saying the means of getting there wasn't good. That doesn't mean that we should punish that child. And I think that's important to recognize. But the church intrinsically teaches against in vitro fertilization and surrogacy. One, because surrogacy is a form of slavery, and it's a manipulative and bad for the women who are surrogates. And IVF is a process that is incredibly damaging and harmful for the mother and bad for the child. Why is it bad for the mother? Well, the woman who goes through a super ovulation, a retrieval of eggs, is often pushed into menopause early. The body's not meant to produce many eggs at once. Also, it's creating new human life through acts, especially for the man, of masturbation in order to bring about that child as well, in order to procure the sperm. The whole situation is an absolute mess where we're creating new human life in a petri dish. This idea of in vitro fertilization lies to women, telling women that you can always have children on your own. Just freeze your eggs, have babies when you want. That's a lie. This woman, Jacqueline Mish, whose story I just told you, she's an Instagram influencer. She's gone through 3 rounds of in vitro fertilization, and she has not been able to carry a living baby in her arms. It's a lie, and we have to stop telling women this because they're delaying having children, and they're seeking means that are destroying their souls. I've talked to so many people in coffee shops and places where they share with me randomly, when they find out about what I do, about how in vitro fertilization destroyed perhaps their spouse's life. I've heard from husbands where their wives have not been able to function properly after rounds of IVF, and the lie. You see, in vitro fertilization also doesn't heal and acknowledge the challenge and the heartbreak that comes about for women who are struggling with fertility and infertility. We need to help women with healing, of understanding that you are whole even if you cannot have children, that you can still practice spiritual motherhood, and that a motherhood being written on your heart is a good and great thing, even if not able to have a biological child of your own. You see, IVF isn't an answer. It's only creating more challenges and problems in the midst of what should be a joyous occasion.